This video will walk you through the identification and documentation process that will be required in order for us to locally approve student use of designated supports on state assessments such as STAR and EOC. The Texas Education Agency has made new designated supports available for any student who meets eligibility criteria. These supports are divided up into 4 groups. Groups 1 and 2, the subject of this video, are available to any student who meets eligibility criteria. Groups 3 and 4, which we'll only discuss briefly, are available only to students who have an IEP, a 504, or receive ESL services. Group 1 of the designated supports only has one eligibility criterion, and that is that students routinely and effectively use the designated support during classroom instruction and classroom testing. Group 1 designated supports include amplification devices, basic transcribing, Braille, use of a dictionary, individualized structured reminders, manipulating test materials, and projection devices. As we look at Lead Forward's quick look that lists these designated supports in that group, notice that these supports may be provided to any student who meets this single eligibility criterion. The supports are listed on the left with a column for descriptions, the tests on which they may be used, and that single eligibility criterion, which again each time lists routine and effective use of the support during classroom instruction and classroom testing. Notice on the right the authority for decision and documentation for students who do not have an IEP, a 504 plan, or an LPAC. Any other student that falls within the purview of the RTI team, student assistance team, or other appropriate team of people as per district policy. This video outlines what our policy is as far as documentation is concerned. But for any student to be able to be eligible to use any of these 7 designated supports, they would only have to meet that one eligibility criterion of routine and effective use in classroom instruction and testing. Group 2 designated supports still have that criterion about routine and effective use in classroom instruction and testing, but they also have additional criteria that might include a student with a reading difficulty that could be caused for a number of different reasons, might include dyslexia, could include a vision impairment. The 3 Group 2 designated supports are extra time on the same day, large print materials, and oral or side administration. As we look at page 2 of Lead Forward's document about designated supports, Group 2, again, may be provided to any student who meets specific eligibility criteria, but notice in the column for eligibility criteria that there is much more than just the single criterion of routine and effective use. So the 3 different supports are listed over on the left with their descriptions, tests on which they can be used, their eligibility criteria, with the same authority for decision making and documentation per district policy, which this video and its accompanying document will outline. The first step is identifying which students we would be targeting with designated supports. Each STAR or EOC tested PLC should meet together to examine data. First, determining students who failed at the STAR EOC for the previous administration, using either DMAC or Eduphoria. Then determining students who failed or maybe didn't meet a slightly higher threshold, such as a 75 average or something like that, in an applicable course for the first semester, and that can be accessed through Skyward. This will give you a list of students that is much shorter than the list of all students for the grade level. On this list, you need to strike everyone who has an IEP, a 504 plan, or an LPAC. Those committees make the decisions concerning those students' use of designated supports and won't need to be decided by this group of teachers. This will produce a narrowed list of students who aren't hitting that desired threshold for grades or STAR EOC performance, for whom then various designated support or supports may be tried. In order to look at which designated supports might be successful with specific students, the teachers of record then would need to provide information about their students for the group to consider. The PLC could examine those allowable designated supports in the document from Lead Forward that is linked in this document. and their criteria for use very carefully, because if you wander into group 2, remember it's going to be more than just routine and effective use in the classroom. And then use those specific designated supports with those specific students as immediately as possible. Use of designated supports will need to be documented in order for us to be able to locally approve them. As with all other RTI documentation, this documentation will need to take place in DMAC through the RTI plan. I'm going to take you through how that happens in DMAC. So we're going to go over to DMAC. The first thing you would do is log in. Once logged in, under Student Plans, you will need to choose RTI. Once there, you'll choose the grade level of the student you need to look up, and part of their last name will help narrow the search list. And once you've found your student's name, if they have an RTI plan that's active, it'll have a clipboard. If not, I'm going to go ahead and destroy this plan because it was the one I was working on. If they don't have an established plan, then the green plus will be there to establish a plan. This will probably be the case for most students. Once you reach the screen, notice on the left-hand side, Notes is the default for RTI since you're in the RTI plan. This Notes section is where you will document what it is that goes on with a student. And you can add a note simply by clicking on the green plus. Notes are going to be time-stamped, so if I'm doing it on the day that a decision is made or that a designated support is used, I don't need to add the date. But if something happened on a different date, I could include that in my documentation. That documentation needs to include what decisions were made for a student, when a decision was made, what designated support was used, what the result for that student was, and it needs to be signed with the person's initials. So I might make a note that a decision was made on the 9th of January to use, let's say, individualized structured reminders. And there are several different forms of those, so in reading the description, we chose to use them in the form of a personal timer that is controlled by the student. And that may be all in the first one because I haven't used it with a student yet. And then I just click Save, give it just a second, and then over on the left-hand side, you will see your note appear with the date stamp that you didn't put, but that DMAC will automatically add. And then you can just continue to add notes to that particular one. It may be that the next time I saw that student in class on the 11th, student used personal timer during an Algebra 1 quiz. Student was able to successfully complete the quiz in the allotted time. Student scored 75. Again, give it a second, and then you'll see over on the left the note comes up above the last note you put in. And you can get out of this plan and get back into this plan. And when you come back to the plan after having been out of it for a while, you'll still get in the same way. And your notes that you've already made will be there, and you just continue adding notes. If you ever come upon the instance where you need to use a group 2 accommodation with a student, you'll need to provide also documentation of how that student meets criteria for that designated support. So just some reminders, those notes you make are date stamped. Your first note needs to include the date when a decision was made to use a specific designated support with this student. Some of the why would be awesome. The note must mention the content area in which the designated support was used. I didn't do a good job of that on my first note that you saw me write. My second one, I did say it was an Algebra 1 quiz. The result for the specific student, what they scored, whether they were able to successfully complete it or not, and that has to occur each time the student receives that designated support. In order to meet that benchmark of routine and effective use, this has to occur several times over a few weeks. Whoever makes the note needs to sign it with their initials, and you have to click the Save button in order to save the note. You must also include documentation for any Group 2 designated supports about how the student meets the additional criteria. I've got some sample notes in this other document for you that have the running tab of notes made for a specific student. And because I made this all on one day, notice that my timestamps all say the 3rd of January. Having all your stuff go in on one day is not recommended. Doing it as you go along is really much simpler. And that will provide better documentation that is time-stamped in a way that we assure that the student really has been routinely using it. And then the documentation shows how effective it has been for the student. If you have any questions, please reach out to the secondary RTI folks, Conrad, Jennifer Heilman, the assessment folks, either Shannon or Amy. We would be happy to help you.